Welcome everyone. We're so excited. Welcome to our, what month it is? It's our April event with Data Culture. I'm Gabby, one of the founders of Data Culture, and we're going to start by just doing a little intro to our team. I'll pass it over to you, Leah.
Hello, my name is Leah. I'm also a co-founder of Data Culture and very happy you could all make it. I'll pass it to Michaela.
Hello, my name is Michaela and I manage operations and education at Data Culture, and very happy as well that everyone is here. So nice to see everybody. I will pass it over to the star of the night, Amanda.
Hey everyone, my name is Amanda. I'll be leading tonight's presentation. I do analytics engineering and a lot of BI work for Data Culture. So thank you all for being here. I'm excited.
I will let you share your screen, Amanda. Today, this is our first dashboard and BI focused event, which is really exciting. We've done a couple other kind of career pieces in the past. But yeah, this is sort of our way. One of Data Culture's missions, we help organizations solve problems using data. And we also want to bring more voices into the field of data science, data engineering, and BI. So that is what we are doing today. And we also recently launched a data visualization studio. So this month is focused on design work for that. And you can check out more information on dataculture.studio.com or just .studio, dataculture.studio. I've been doing this for years. Okay. Anything else you want to say, Leah?
I will just say before we kick it off, so Data Culture is a data and analytics consultancy. We do full stack data implementations, including business intelligence, dashboarding, data visualization, as Gabby mentioned. But more importantly, we're a community of people who really care about data and bringing new voices into the field. So we really encourage you all to stay connected with us. Many of you are probably in our Slack channel. If not, you can join it on datacult.com. I can drop these links in the Slack. And we'll also stick around after the event for a few minutes if anyone has specific questions. But we're just excited to grow the Data Culture community, so you are in the right place. And with that, I will pass it to you, Amanda.
Okay, great. So yeah, like I said, my name is Amanda. Do analytics engineering and BI work at Data Culture. My background's kind of varied. I've worked on a lot of political campaigns. So I was most recently on the Biden and Elizabeth Warren political campaigns. And I've worked at like media companies and other places before. And throughout that, I've always worked in the analytics space. And basically, no matter what I've been doing, whether it's working with like voter data or like product or marketing analytics or advertising analytics, I've always had reporting and dashboarding and BI work be a part of my job. So I'm excited to, like share some things I've learned over the years and also, hear like what you guys have to say too. Feel free, we are going to save time at the end to do a Q&A. We're going to start sort of with a broad overview. I should say that this is going to be very high level and it's really meant for beginners to BI. We're not going to get super technical. We are going to have a live Tableau dashboard demo at the end. But this is really geared for beginners. We're going to talk about like high level concepts in BI and like what are good things to be thinking about when you're going through the dashboard process. And then, drop questions in the chat as you have them, but we'll also have Q&A time at the end. All right. So with that, we can kick it off. So we should probably start by just talking about like what is business intelligence. And BI is kind of a term that's like thrown around a lot and is kind of nebulous and means a lot of different things to different people. How I think of it is really just that it's how do you, like ingest and organize and display information in a way that it's actionable to your end users and that it's going to like let them actually gain insights to improve their business or their organization. And so to me, that means like in modern terms, I think BI means like it's a lot about like self-service, right? So presenting information so that your end user, whether they're really technical or maybe less technical, can still get something out of it and make a decision. And also like just basically make it so that it's very like quick and easy for them. They shouldn't have to do a lot of work, right? Like whatever you're showing them should be like pretty easily digestible. And so a big part of BI obviously then is like reporting and dashboarding, right? Because that is a way to like translate data for a less technical audience and allow them to like gain insights quickly. So I just mentioned dashboards. So, when you think of a dashboard, you think of, like something someone can log on to, right? Or pull up on their computer and they see a bunch of like, charts or numbers or graphics, whatever. And really, like, when you think of like who could be a dashboard consumer, I mean, we've listed some roles here, but the answer is really, in today's environment, like anyone, right? So like it could be people on like product teams, marketing teams, advertising. It could be like engineering teams. Like basically anyone can benefit from seeing data about like their job function or their group or their performance visualized and presented in a helpful way. So that's really cool. And like I said before too, it really runs a gamut of people who are like super technical to people who are like, would consider themselves very not technical, right? If you do the job right and display the information in a helpful way. So how are dashboards made? Well, they're made with BI tools. And there are a number of different BI tools here. We've listed, a few of them out here. Essentially, a BI tool is just software that's going to let you connect your data. And when I say connect your data could be a bunch of like Excel files, right? A bunch of like CSVs, or it could be something more sophisticated, right? Like if you have a data warehouse, you could connect this software directly to, for example, your BigQuery warehouse or Snowflake or whatever, Redshift, whatever it is that your company or organization uses. And this is what's going to help you translate that data once you've connected it into visualizations, right? So you can make your graphs, you can make your tables, and you can group them and organize them together in a layout that makes sense and like tells a story to the end user. And that's like really what's the most important part. Like we could spend all day doing like really cool academic like exploration of the data, and that's awesome. But at the end of the day, like the number one thing to keep in mind when you're doing any dashboarding or reporting and BI work in general is like, how is this going to be actionable for the end user?
Amanda, just to jump in for 1 second, to get a sense of like what all of our participants have had exposure to, maybe just drop in the chat, like if you look at dashboards from any of these tools in your role, or if you build dashboards, or what is your exposure to BI, just feel free to drop it in, and that will help us guide the discussion.
Yep, great. And yeah, we've listed out a few here. I've used like, I think almost all of these tools here. Tableau is really great. I think that's probably my favorite just in terms of what you can do with it. We're going to do a demo later with using Tableau Public, which is the free version of Tableau. So if you'd like to follow along, you should have been emailed out a Tableau workbook to download, but you do have to install Tableau Public before that. Instructions are in the email. If you haven't done that yet, no worries. I'm going to screen share everything and you can dig in deeper on your own after this presentation's over.
Nice. So we have a lot of Tableau and Power BI users in the audience, which is awesome.
Awesome. Great.
Some Looker as well. And someone's using custom visualizations as well, which is a whole nother path we can explore. But yeah, we'll be mostly talking about BI tools today.
Okay, great. Yeah, and again, this is geared really towards the beginner. So if you have more experience, that's awesome. We're going to talk about like, most of it's going to be geared toward like general principles of like when you're designing a dashboard, and I'm not going to spend so much time getting into like, right, the nitty gritty of like, how do you do this specific thing in Tableau? We'll do a little bit of that at the end. All right. So without further ado, let's jump into sort of like the meat of this presentation, which is, as like through the years of like when I built all these dashboards, these are kind of like the steps of how I think about like the dashboarding work. And like I have thought about these steps in terms of how do I like use my time most efficiently, and how do I avoid like wasting my time or the client's time. I'm going to use the word like client or consumer. What I mean by that is just whoever is going to be like using the dashboard to try to gain insights. But essentially, like, it's just how do I use my time most efficiently, and how do I wind up with a product that is like going to be most actionable and helpful for the end consumer. So essentially, I think there are 3 steps. And the first step is defining your use cases, or figuring out, okay, who's the consumer of this? What are they trying to get out of this dashboard? Like, and how can I like help them get at what they're actually trying to answer? The second is defining your data. So understanding what sources of data are going to be needed for this dashboard. How are they like aggregated and connected to my BI tool? And then like how does that work? And then the last step is kind of what I think everyone thinks of when they think of BI is like the visualization, right? Like the cool dashboard with the cool visualizations. So we're going to dig into each of these steps, but the one thing I want to call out right away is that like this visualization arrow or section of the path is smaller, and like that's intentional. I really have found through countless times doing this that like the more time you spend defining your use cases and like the client's like actual needs up front, the less time and the much easier it is for you to actually do the visualization. And the last thing you want to do is like build a whole visualization, right? Only to show it to the client and then say, oh, actually, I was kind of trying to get at this. So we're just going to talk about these 3 steps a little bit in detail. All right.
Amanda,
yes.
also, sorry, I keep jumping in, but also think it's worth mentioning like what can happen if you skip any of those first 2 steps. I think the instinct for a lot of people, because obviously building visualizations is super exciting. Everyone wants to see them. You can build them quickly with these awesome tools. But if you're not really diligent about defining use cases and creating the right data structure, you often end up creating more work for yourself. So if you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
No, that's exactly right. Like, I mean, I think everyone's first instinct, and this was me too when I first started dashboarding, is like, great, like they want to, I'm doing work for an ad agency and they want to know about their campaign for performance. Like, great, I'm immediately going to jump into Tableau. I'm going to like connect all my Facebook data. I'm going to start like making these charts and laying stuff out. And, that takes time, right? Like to like think through like what data should be included, how should it be organized. So if you're doing all of that work and doing the work of like actually creating the visualizations in your BI tool, before you've even like been able to take a step back with the client and say like, what are you trying to get out of it? 9 times out of 10, like when you show it to them, their reaction is going to be like, oh, I think we were a little misaligned. Like we actually wanted this, or can we add this? And at that point, you're going to just like a lot of that work was going to be wasted, right? That you've already done. Whereas if you had really spent time at the beginning scoping with the client what this project looks like and what they're trying to get out of it, and like done a mock-up, which we're going to talk about, that's going to save you a lot of time. Also, if you jump right into the visualization before doing these other steps, you could potentially have like added a lot of like data work for yourself too. So if you realize later on that like you built all of your tables aggregated to the month level, right? And then you show that to them, and then later they're like, oh, we do all of our reporting on the week level. And like, it's really important to see that. You now have to like redo all those tables that you built. And again, this is like, drop in the chat too. I'm curious of how many people here use SQL or familiar with relational databases. We're going to touch on that a little bit, but not get too in the weeds. So don't worry if that's totally new to you. But yeah, you just add a lot of work for yourself if you don't do these first 2 steps. So the first step is defining your use cases. And so whenever I've gotten a new project, I think it's always like really helpful to just actually like literally take time face to face with the client and talk about what they're trying to get out of this dashboard. So at a bare minimum, I think the questions that you should identify in this initial conversation are like, who are the dashboard consumers? So like, and that can literally mean like what team within the organization is consuming this, and like, or like what roles within the team is consuming this dashboard. And then really nailing down like what questions are they trying to answer? Like what business problems are they trying to solve? What parts of their business are they trying to make better by using the data from this dashboard? And like what information or KPIs or metrics is going to help them make those decisions? And when I've had these conversations, like it's fine to go there. Sometimes there's back and forth, and that's great. That means like it's a conversation where both sides are involved. I've seen it go one of 2 ways. Sometimes it goes really in the route of like, the client like doesn't really know. And like when you start doing this conversation, you realize like, oh, this is kind of like a vague need, but they haven't really thought through like exactly what business decisions they're going to make based off of this. And in that case, I think it's like really helpful to get more specific with them. And like, I've had times where like the conversations we've had have helped them like realize like, oh, actually like this would really be helpful because of X, Y, and Z. So like really helping them think about like, what are their KPIs? What are the things like the metrics that we can help surface for them that are like levers or that can be indicators for something going on in their business. And sometimes they're on the opposite route, right? Where you have a client who's like really prescriptive and they're like, I want these exact metrics. I want like this to be a line graph, right? Like I want this exact thing. And in some ways that's good, but I would always say too, don't ever be afraid to like push back. If like at the end of the day, like you should be like the data expert in the room or the BI expert. So don't feel afraid to at least ask a clarifying question, like how are you planning on using this? Because that's helpful for you too. And sometimes when you ask that question, they'll realize, oh, actually, maybe that's not as important of a metric as I thought it was, or something like that. And then I always, and this can kind of happen, it's kind of a blended between the defining use cases stage and the defining data stage, but somewhere in there, I always do a mock-up. And by that, I literally mean, like, if I'm in person, I will do it on with a pen and a piece of paper. And like, this isn't about like, what does the color palette look like? It's not even always about like, exactly, is it a line chart or a bar chart? It's honestly about just like what information is going to be included, and like how is that going to be grouped. And so I'll literally like write like, here's where you would select the date range. Okay, now here's a box, like this box is going to show you revenue by month, and like then this other box is going to be a chart that shows you, you know, this other metric by acquisition channel or something. And I really think that's a helpful way to do it, even if it's just pen and paper or an online sketch tool, whatever. And at the end of the day, you just want to nail down what are the metrics that you're including, which is like pretty self-explanatory, a count of users or revenue. And then what are the dimensions? And just so everyone's clear, like a dimension is anything that data can be cut by. So sometimes clients don't understand that right away. And I explain it as, if you're ever asking a question, whatever comes after the word by is the dimension. So if they ever say, I want to see revenue by month, like month is the dimension, right? That's what the data is being like segmented or cut by. Or if they say, I want to see cost per acquisition by channel, marketing channel, then marketing channel is a dimension. So I think at a bare minimum, make sure the metrics and dimensions that are available are being included in the mockup, and that you get the client feedback before you dive in and start like building tables in your database and like doing visualizations. Okay, so once that's all done, you've like had a mock-up, they've reacted to it, they're like, yeah, this seems pretty good. You want to start thinking about your data. And I think there's just two main parts to this step. One, identify what data you need and where it's coming from. So if you're at a ad agency and they're like, we want to know our projected spend versus actual spend, and we want to see it by week, by channel, you would say, okay, great. I'm going to poke around and, you know, maybe it's a data warehouse, right? Maybe they use a Snowflake data warehouse, and you look around in there and you say, great, I see there's these two tables on the left-hand side. One that both of them are by day and by channel and by sub-channel, which they actually don't want. I asked them about it and they're not interested in that. And one has projected spend and one has actual spend. Right? There's no data like missing. But then the second thing to think about that I would really urge you to do is aggregate and like clean up your data as much as possible on the back end before you connect it to your BI tool. And there's a couple reasons for this. So one, the more tables, the more data sources you're adding into your Tableau workbook or whatever tool it is you're using, and the more joins you're doing, can just slow things down. Like you'll see, even when we open this Tableau workbook during our demo, it can sometimes be slow. So you want to aggregate as much as possible. Like ideally, if you were working with a data warehouse, you would want to like create one final reporting table or two final reporting tables and connect those to Tableau. So in this case, what I would do is if they said to me in our conversation, they do everything by, you know, week, and they only care about channel, they don't care about sub-channel, I would probably go ahead and like make this table I've shown on the right, that's by week and by channel. So it's cut out the extraneous info of like the daily granularity, the sub-channel granularity, it's aggregated it, and now I can connect it to my dashboard. And then the other thing too is for data governance purposes, like if you're defining metrics within your Tableau workbook, that's not helpful for anyone else on your team, right? So if you're defining this revenue metric in a workbook, now if that ever changes, someone's gonna have to go to each workbook and change it in there. Whereas if you had just changed it on the back end, you can change it once there and that change will flow to all of your reports. So really urge you to think through that as much as end. All right, so once we've gotten here, at this point, we should have an idea of everything that should be included in the dashboard. Our data should be in place, and we should already have a mock-up, like a sketch of what the dashboard looks like that's been approved by the client. So now we're kind of like on, like we're rolling now. Like this is like the easiest part, I think, is ahead of us, or the time that should take us, the part that should take us the least amount of time, which is actually hopping into our BI tool and doing the visualizations themselves and building the dashboard. And so I think like the two main things I would say to think about when you actually are doing the visualization in the BI tool is one, like choose proper visualizations for the information you're trying to convey. The number one thing I'll say here is like, you want to keep it as simple as possible. Like there are some really crazy and like really cool visualizations you can do in Tableau and other BI tools. But at the end of the day, like usually simpler is better. And for the only reason for that is like BI is all about being actionable. And if your user is like confused by a graph or a chart and like doesn't know how to read it, they're just like, it's not going to be actionable for them, right? So like most of the time, a simple bar chart or a line chart or a table, even if it's not the most exciting thing in the world, is usually going to be the right choice for your visualization. And then you also want to keep like the overall style of the dashboard as simple as possible. Like try to use, if they have a brand color palette, try to incorporate that. Don't have like 10 billion different colors, like make the colors different enough so that it's like readable, that general kind of stuff. And then the other big thing to think about too is like, how do you organize your information? So I think it's really helpful to like group and have sections or groupings within your dashboard. And you want to like be grouping related information. So we'll talk about this in our walkthrough we're about to do. And that can entail like actually having like section headers or like physically sectioning things off in dashboards to let the user know, hey, like these things are in the section together because they're related in some way. And you should be like thinking about these two things as like one component maybe. And then other like basic design principles apply to like, highlight, like the most important thing should be towards the top of the dashboard and should be the biggest, right? Like that kind of, like basic design stuff. And and then like, so that's kind of like what you should keep in mind when you're actually in the BI tool itself and working on these visualizations. So before, if there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Otherwise, I think we're gonna hop into the live Tableau demonstration, which is exciting. So if you have downloaded, if you have installed Tableau Public per the instructions in the email sent out yesterday, and you've downloaded the workbook, you can go ahead and open up that workbook now to that first tab. And I'm gonna do the same. While you're doing that, I think it's just helpful to like go through our like 3 steps. So I'm giving you a hypothetical use case, which is that you've been asked by the New York City Taxi Commission to provide a dashboard about ridership, right? About like, kind of vague, right? So let's say you're trying to define your use cases. You walk into this client meeting and you start talking to them and you figure out, all right, the consumer of this is the Taxi Commission dispatch leadership. I should say right off the bat, I know really next to nothing about the taxi business or industry. So please know that these questions are geared towards just showing you a good visualization and how to think about that, and are probably not how they actually think about it in the actual business. But let's say you walk out of that conversation, they immediately say, look, there's like 2 really important things we want in this dashboard, or that are really important to us. One is maybe they have monthly goals for how many passengers they are transporting, and they really just want to know right away, like for that month. And they say, we really think of it as monthly because of whatever business reason they like reporting on the month level. And they just want to know, like, did we hit our goal for that month or not? And that's really important. We need to see that right away. And then maybe they say the second thing they want to know is like, how do payment types vary by borough in New York, right? So like payment types like cash versus credit card or whatever. So you would say, okay, maybe you're talking through your initial convo with them and you're talking about their first question about their goal. And you might ask, all right, well, like, if let's say you saw that you didn't hit your goal, like what would you want to see next after that, right? And so maybe they'd say, well, like, we do think of things geographically, like by borough. So maybe we'd want to see like how each borough, like how many trips each borough is having. Or maybe like, are there hours of the day where, there aren't that many trips or something, where maybe it's due to like the supply of cabs available, who knows? And then maybe you'd say, great. Also like, in terms, you could look at trip volume, but also you'd maybe want to know like, how many passengers are there per trip, right? Since your actual KPI you care about is number of passengers. So maybe that's how your initial convo went, all right? And so you're going into it saying, great, like, I think this makes sense. You did like a mock-up, or we're gonna skip that step for now and do it together live. And then you get to the define your data step. And so at this step, I just, so everyone here knows, and we'll send out these slides after, but we are just using, this is all publicly available data from the New York City Taxi Commission. So I've gone on here, or I've gone into my data warehouse, right, and begun exploring, and I see that there are some tables. In actuality, they're CSVs, and there's one CSV per month, and each CSV is one row per trip, right, per taxi trip. And then I see this other lookup table for the different zones, and where one zone is a borough. And I know from my conversation, oh, they care about like trips by borough, so I should make sure we have that information. So maybe I've gone in and I've identified, great, like these are the CSVs that I'm gonna need. I've downloaded them, and I have like thought about, do they have everything I need? Yes. How can I aggregate them? So in this particular case, if you've downloaded this workbook, you are downloading Tableau Public, which is the free to use version of Tableau. It's basically like the interface and everything is the same. There's just some limits on the data sources you can connect and like how you can save it locally. I also don't think you all will be able to see when you click on the data sources tab on the bottom left if you have your workbook open, which is why I've screenshotted it here. But basically Tableau and any other BI tool in existence, you connect your data sources and then you have to like relate them to each other. So I'm not going to get too in the weeds of this, but if you're familiar with relational databases, it's kind of the same concept. You attach or connect your data sources and then you have to relate them to each other. So just for those who are interested, the underlying data of this workbook is you have your CSVs, one per month here. I've limited it to just March through May 2020, just for the sake of speeding up the workbook load time. So this is basically a union or a combination of those three. And then, you know, you can kind of see here a preview of what that looks like, right? So I said it's one row per trip, and it's got a lot of info about the trip, like the time of the trip pickup, right? The time the passenger is picked up. Passenger count, how many passengers were in the cab, what was the trip distance, you know, all this kind of stuff. So I have that, but let's say I'm looking through that and I'm like, well, they had said that they really care about, did they hit their goal? And I don't see any columns, you know, when I'm looking through this data source about a goal. So maybe that lives in a separate like CSV or Excel file, right, that they maintain, and it's, you know, one column is month and the other is the passenger goal for that month. So I'm gonna, you know, go ahead and connect that. And then I'm also gonna connect this taxi lookup table. And then just really briefly, I said it's kind of like a relational database. So whenever you do connect your data sources, you have to tell Tableau how they relate to one another. So for those of you who are at all familiar with SQL, it's basically the same concept as like a SQL join here. So in this case, we've just joined like the pickup location ID of the trip from the trip data to the location ID of the zone lookup table so that we can get the borough. Again, if you're not that familiar with the relational databases or SQL, like don't worry about that. The idea is you connect your data and relate it to one another. Some of you are probably rightfully asking, I thought you said it was best to combine your data sources on the back end and then connect to Tableau, to which I would say you are exactly right. Like this, I only did this kind of to show you how, like what is possible with Tableau, right? And just kind of show you like, it's inevitable that you are sometimes going to have to join data. So I wanted to show you an example of like how that works and how you think about their relations. But in a perfect world, what I would have done is I would have taken all three of these data sources and made one table on my back end that combined all of them together so that it's like just simplifying what I have to do on the front end. But just wanted to show that.
Yeah, I was going to say, Amanda, how often do you actually end up using the Tableau feature where you join data sources? And when you talk about the back end, like just is it Google Sheets pulling stuff together, or more sophisticated ways that you work? And then if others want to go ahead.
No, yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, please drop in the chat or whatever if you have like thoughts on this as well. But I mean, it kind of depends where you're working. Like, yeah, if you have a bunch of CSV files, you could definitely just combine all of those together to one CSV and connect it, or like do it as a Google Sheet and connect it. I think Tableau can connect to a Google Sheet or just download. That's like 100% a solution and like would have been great to do here. Or again, if you're more working in a, data warehouse environment where you're using SQL, I would 100% encourage you to create like a table in there that is doing all these joins that way. But again, just kind of wanted to show you like how Tableau and every BI tool, like Looker is the same way, right? Like all of them kind of behave the same way, where it's like you have to relate them to each other. Cool.
Thanks, Amanda. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so now let's hop into our visualization. So I'm gonna, again, these are the questions that we have that we want to answer. And now I'm going to share my screen with the Tableau workbook that if you've downloaded it, you'll be able to follow along. And if I'm going too fast or anything, please like feel free to drop in the chat and let me know. Or but do remember also, we are recording this and we'll be sharing out the recording of this presentation afterwards. This is really meant to be a jumping off point. Like I really want this to be something that you all can like have and download, and then like after this presentation's over, go through it and like make your own visualizations and play around with this data and see like what cool things you can do with it or how you would do things differently. And yeah, it's really meant to be like something you can take home and continue to think about. But basically here, just in the interest of time and not having Tableau continually load up, I pre-built a lot of this already, but I just want to start by talking through the general concepts within a BI tool, then talk through this dashboard I built here, and then we're going to actually do one visualization, make it together. So basically every single BI tool, Tableau included, has the concept of like visualizations or specific parts of a dashboard and then the whole dashboard. So Tableau calls them worksheets and dashboards. Looker calls them looks and dashboards. Like every tool basically thinks about it the same way. So in Tableau, a worksheet is a component of a dashboard. So here I had this like really, really basic, like again, like just like really basic dashboard that I put together. And so each of these components, right, each of these like charts that are in here are basically different worksheets within Tableau. So what you do is you build each of these visualizations individually, and then you combine them together in a dashboard and you organize them in a way that like makes sense for the end user. So when we talked about like principles to keep in mind for dashboarding, we first said, one thing to keep in mind is like fit your visualization to the data you're trying to display. So for example, on this chart here, right, they said it's really important to them to be able to see at a glance, like, did we hit our goal or not, for passengers. So here, the passenger, you have month on the x-axis, passenger count here. And then each of these bars is the actual passenger count. And then this yellow line is the goal. There are a couple options I could have done here, right? I could have done 2 bars, one that's the actual, one that's the goal. I think sometimes like with goals, I like to have just a line here, and you can see really at a glance, like, cool, like they missed their goal, right? By a lot for all 3 of these months, it seems like. Again, this is like a very like basic version of this, but probably makes sense, right? This is March, April, and May of 2020, right when COVID broke out. Like, I'm not surprised that they didn't hit their passenger goal for March 2020. But that's just like one thing there. So we kind of went with a bar chart there. And then, they said, it's helpful to think about like trips by borough. So we have the, breakdown here, like just again, a simple bar chart by borough. This is just kind of to show you a few like options of what you can do in Tableau. And then they were like, maybe if we're not doing as well, like we want to actually see our trips by hour of the day. Again, like that's kind of a naive question, right? Like it's probably going to be all the time, like the same, it probably looks relatively similar like over time, but like, again, just to like kind of show you what you can do in Tableau, we're just going to go with that naive assumption that like maybe if, you see one borough not doing as well, it's like probably Manhattan always has the most, but just for the sake of this exercise, we'll go with that. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete this right now. I don't think you all will have that because we're going to do that together. But basically that's that. And then we talked about also, visualization, like principles or design principles. So I think it's always good to, like, when you can, include the brand or company or organization logo or something that like signifies this belongs to this organization. It's pretty like standard to have that up at the top. You want to call it your dashboard title, like prominently at the top, which I've done here. And then we talked about organizing your data, like related data together, and like putting the most important stuff at top. So if in my conversations, like I took away that like this is the most important thing to them is like, what was our passenger count for that month? And like, did we hit our goal? That's right up here at the top. And then when you think about sections, right? So if they've said to me, like, this is the number one thing we care about, and if we're trying to diagnose, like maybe like what was the cause of us missing our goal, like it would be helpful to look at breakdowns by borough and by hour of day. Well, maybe I want to group trips by borough and trips by hour of day together in this like section that I've titled with a header trips breakdown, because I think that maybe like both of those play a part in answering that question. Why did we like miss our goal, right? So maybe it makes sense, again, kind of a naive assumption that this is just like doesn't take into account the like supply of taxis that were out at that time and all that stuff. But, maybe those are together. And I've told the user that these things like maybe are related because I've labeled them in a section that I've clearly defined with this block here that says trip breakdowns. And then I've labeled each graph here, trips by hour of day and borough. There's so many different options you can do. Like, this is by no means like the only option or even like the best option of how to visualize it, just something I threw together as like a basic example. But yeah, that's kind of that. And then you can also see too, it's good to like try to limit your color palette when you can, or make it tied to the brand. So I went to their taxi commission website. Sometimes you can get the actual color palette from your client, which is like the best case scenario. And I saw cool, like their colors are this yellow, this blue, and then these grays. So I've tried to limit myself just to those like 4 colors. Sometimes when you're doing some visualizations like this, you just like need more color, and that's okay. And, I'd love to hear if anyone, has, any ideas on like how this could be improved. That'd be great to hear too. Feel free to drop in the chat. But yeah, that's kind of like the basics, of this dashboard. So again, I said Tableau's dashboards and workbooks. A dashboard's anything with this window pane symbol in front of it. But if we went and looked at a worksheet, like if I click on the passengers by month worksheet, you can see this is like the individual visualization, right? So passengers by month, oh, it's this bar chart with the line chart. If you hop back to the dashboard, that's what's up here, right? I've literally just like created this specific graph and then added it in to my dashboard. So now we have a few minutes left. Let's really briefly try to create one visualization together. So you can see from this, I think the one thing that was missing that I talked about in my slides, and maybe I'd included in my mock-up that I showed them, was the average passengers per trip. And how does that vary by month, right? So if we see like in May, we missed our goal, it's probably definitely because like trip volume went down, but could it also because the average passengers per trip went down too? I think that might make sense, right? It's like the beginning of a pandemic. Maybe people don't want to be like sharing cabs as much. So we can go ahead and see if we can visualize that maybe as like a bar graph by month, average passengers per trip. You'll be able to see too, like if you look at this later, I already did that, by the way, and it's already included in the workbook. So if you don't want to like follow along for this part and you just want to watch me doing it, that's fine. You can always play around with it later because the end product is already in the workbook. So earlier we talked about like metrics versus dimensions. Tableau has a similar concept, as does every BI tool. They call it, you can see here, measures and dimensions. So if we want to know, I want to see average passengers per trip by month. So we know average passengers per trip is going to be our metric. And so I've already created that metric in here. Once again, I have broken my best practice of like, you would ideally do any kind of calculations or definitions, like an average passengers per trip on the back end. I did it in the front end just so I want to like expose you to like kind of some of the features that are available in BI tools. And in this case, that's a custom calculation. So if you go down here on your left-hand side to the average passengers per trip, and you click on this little arrow here, and then you click edit, you can actually see how I've defined that. So I've literally just summed the passenger count for every row, where one row is a trip, and then divided that by, this is essentially just the count of the number of rows that there are. And because I've done my due diligence and I understand this data set, I know that one row is a trip. So a count of the rows is a count of the number of trips. So if I'm just doing passengers divided by trips for average passengers per trips, I've now created that calculation. So if we know that's our metric, let's just see what happens if we go ahead and put that, or let's put it here just to see. All right, great. So I'm hovering over this. This isn't very helpful so far, right? But I see here my average passengers per trip is 1.398. And so that is just like for my entire data set. So from March to May for all yellow taxi rides, 1.4 is the average. All right, but I don't want the average. I want the average by month, right? So month is my dimension. And so what I'm going to do here is we have this pickup date value. So I wonder what happens if I add it there. Well, Tableau does a weird thing where even if this is a date, it always defaults it to being the year. So just to show you, you can like manipulate date times. I can go in here. So if you click in the rows, this year pickup date, you can go down, you see all these different options, right? You could convert it to a quarter if you want to see it by quarterly. We're going to go down here to month. Okay. So that looks a little funky, right? That's not really what I want. I'm just gonna, don't worry about this too much, but sometimes it's helpful for visualization to switch things to discrete instead of continuous. So once again, if I go to my dimension up here and just go down to discrete, okay, that looks a little more helpful, but this doesn't make sense, right? This is going back to the pick the right visualization, like display the data properly for what it is you're trying to show. And anytime you're trying to show time, you always want time to be on the x-axis, like otherwise it doesn't make sense. So I'm going to say, all right, well, maybe if I swap these, there we go. That looks a lot better, right? So that makes more sense with like my months going along on the x-axis here. And you can, just to demonstrate, like you can, hide labels. If I didn't like what this was called average passengers per trip, I could edit that. This seems good. You can also come over here and always change your visualization types. Again, like almost every BI tool like has like a really similar concept to this. So I'm like, hey, maybe instead of a line chart, I think a bar chart's better. Yeah, okay, that seems good. When I hover over it, I can actually see what the value is if I wanted to, though I could add like, that as a data label here, right? So maybe we can do that, right? Great. And then, I need to, label this sheet. So I'm going to call it average passengers per trip. Okay, so that looks good. Now let's go ahead and maybe try to add that to our dashboard. I did a little more legwork than I think what you guys have in your downloaded one, but so just to show you what that could look like, all you need to do at this point, the hard work is done. It's just a question of adding it to your dashboard and rearranging no matter what BI tool you're in. So I'm going to go ahead and just double click here. It's going to list all of your worksheets or visualizations that are available on the left hand. I double click that. There we go. It's in there. And then Tableau and a lot of BI tools are kind of like, you can see they're tile based, right? So when I hover, it's like, I can click to edit like this specific section. And it's kind of just drag and drop. Sometimes it can be finicky, honestly, about like where it lets you drag things, which is just another reason of why it's helpful to like have a mock-up and really know what you're doing before you dive into the tool. So you don't like waste a lot of time like trying to drag things around. But maybe that looks good. And then maybe if I want to just like add this, since I've maybe I think this belongs in a trip statistics section where I'm going to include other information like average fare or average tip or something like that. But basically you can just like, we can go ahead and add a text box here that's average passengers per trip to like set that up to keep parity with like the rest of the dashboard layout. So maybe I do that. And then Tableau, like a lot of tools, it's just gonna like throw things in really unhelpful positions. Like it's just gonna like default it up here. So I'm just gonna pop up here, drag this down. Might be freezing on me now. There you go. and then can resize this to be like in line with those. Yeah, and so now we kind of have that. I can, change the background color of this or the font color or whatever, but won't right now just to save time. But yeah, that's basically it. Like, so you think about like, I think that hopefully showed like what goes into like making the visualizations and like designing the dashboard, why it's so helpful to do as much of the work in the mock-up step as possible before you actually jump into the BI tool, because it's really just going to like save you time instead of like being like, like, should this be like week or month at the bottom? You already have that question answered because you talked about it in your scoping meeting with your client. And, oh, I wonder if I should have like a section called like trip breakdowns and what should be included in that. Well, by the time you open up Tableau, you should hopefully already know the answer to that question because you've already like literally written out a mock-up of it, right? And showed it to your client. So that's just like stuff that's really helpful. And then always like label stuff when possible, like show the legend. The last thing, we're kind of running out of time, so I'm just gonna glance over it, but a lot of times, like it can be helpful to have the dashboards be interactable. I mean, it kind of depends on like who your audience is, but like sometimes like clients will say, yeah, like I really want, like, there's just so many specific use cases I have for being able to compare like, or look at custom time periods. I really want that rather than be locked into just month or week. So like date range selectors are really popular on dashboards and can be really helpful. And so literally all you have to do for something like that is, in Tableau and basically every other tool, there's a concept of filtering. And so in this case, I want them to be able to say, pick a date range for the pickup time of that taxi ride and have every single visualization on the dashboard update to reflect that. So in Tableau and most BI tools, it's as simple as like, if you've organized your data already, you have that set up, you just drag that measure or that dimension into your filter section and apply it to all your worksheets. So we can test it out right now. So if I have it set the default to March through May, but if I drag this into April, cool, it worked. So you see like the March bar disappeared here because that's no longer in the date range. And we're just down to a partial April and May. If I slid that back, you can go here. You can also customize this a lot to do like a calendar instead of a slider. There's a lot of things you can do. So with that, I really want to leave time for questions. Again, this is supposed to be like really high level. Like I like challenge everyone here to like, you have this workbook, like go home, like see what other cool things you can do with the taxi data or see what other cool public data sets are available. Use Tableau Public. I'll also just plug that with Tableau Public, you can publish to your online Tableau Public profile so that the dashboard then gets hosted like on the site. And that's just a cool way to, especially if you're like trying to get into BI or what have you, to kind of build a like publicly available like portfolio for yourself, a BI portfolio. And you can like have visualizations, store them there, and then like link out to that, which is cool. But with that, I will pause. I hope I didn't have to rush through that last section too quickly.
Amanda, that was amazing. And I'm sure everyone cannot wait to ask you questions. Let's all give a clap for Amanda for a second. That was awesome. We can take a couple questions now. We have 6 minutes left. We actually have a question from the chat. It says, from your experience, how often did you end up creating dashboards with simple charts?
I think this person, but feel free to unmute yourself if I'm wrong, is asking like with just like tables, basically, where it's like text instead of a graph. And I think the answer is like a decent amount. Like, I think like on some level, it's like you don't want to just be recreating the output of your database, right? Like a whole table, but there are definitely use cases where they're like, you know what, like this thing, I really need to see like for this dimension, a lot of different metrics. And sometimes I'll do that like at the bottom of the dashboard, be like, if helpful for the users, right, that don't know how to like hop on to Snowflake and query themselves, like we can have this table that's like filterable at the bottom. So I do that a fair amount. And I didn't include a table in here, but it's just as easy to like create a table instead of a graph. Yeah.
Amazing. We also have another question in the chat from Mike that says, any resources or tips for working with stakeholders who don't know exactly what they want, but just seem really excited about wanting to identify and visualize KPIs?
Yeah, I mean, it's like hard. I still struggle with this, honestly. I think it's actually like one of the hardest parts of like doing this type of work is like helping the client figure out what they want. I kind of like start by trying to like I think helpful prodding questions to ask are like, okay, what's a recent project you worked on where and like tell me what the pain points were or like is there anything you can think of you've done recently where you think it would have been helpful to be able to have something at your fingertips? Sometimes I'll ask them to like, okay, like you know, tell me about a time you like needed to get this metric. What prompted you to like need to get that? And like how did you actually like go about accessing it? That can be something as well. And then like sometimes like you don't get it out of the first meeting, honestly, and you need to be like, all right, like I see these are your KPIs. I'd love to like hear more about your use cases. And like at the end of the day, like sometimes you need to like start building and you can't wait for like the perfect understanding and you can always like iterate. But yeah, that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, and Caroline, who's here from Hope Lab, which is an amazing organization, we were literally on a call hours ago just talking about this. It comes up so frequently in our work across organizations. So I have to give you a shout out, Caroline, because this is like clearly a problem that no matter what kind of company you are, it's kind of inevitable. And I think awareness and bringing stakeholders into the conversation. Caroline's an amazing partner here, saying like, they may not know themselves what they're looking for, but how do we go through those steps that Amanda outlined?
Yeah, I truly think that's like the hardest part. And that's why I that's where I end up spending the most of my time, but I think it's worth it.
I have a question. I was just wondering, it seems like online you usually need a master's for data science. Would you say that's true? And like, if not, like, how would you otherwise break into it? Because it just seems like anytime I look on a data science job online, they're like, you need a master's, you need a master's. I'm like, oh, really? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I would say I want to hear Gabby's thoughts on this too. But I mean, yeah, I would say like I think of BI as a function that's like really different from like data science. Like I think like the skills are pretty different of like what's needed. And I would say like you to get an entry level like BI role, you definitely like don't need a master's. I think like in terms of like technical skills, so like there's one part which is just like becoming like an expert or relative expert or being willing to learn a specific BI tool, right? So like I've used like Tableau a lot and other things. Like I recently started using Looker, so I had to like ramp up on that. But like there are some like weird ins and outs that you just learn over time from using it. I do think though it is really helpful if you want to do BI to at least know like some SQL or be willing to learn it because of like that defining data part I talked about. Like you can do drag and drop within the BI tool if you've connected your data, but like the more you can understand how the data is structured and the more you can aggregate your data beforehand, the better off you'll be. But Gabby, I'd like, you know, if you have any thoughts on that question.
Yeah, I think like the easiest answer to that is Amanda does not have a data science master's degree and she is brilliant, right? Like you don't have one. And I think that there's your question hits on like, and why we're so excited about it is like, why are we here tonight? And why are we all like on Zoom after our work days? Or if you're on the West Coast, it's like towards the end of your workday, but whatever it is. And it's because there's a huge barrier to get into this field and data culture really cares about breaking that down. And I think when you're applying for jobs, it's often something that people are putting into descriptions and we're slowly working our way through organizations saying like, you've got to take that out because it's absolutely not necessary. It's really about how do you approach data from a problem solving perspective. You can pick up any number of skills. There's so many resources online. We're all here in this room. Please do feel free to reach out to us. You can ping us on LinkedIn. We respond. Because there's a lot you do learn from higher education programming. Like I did a master's in data visualization, so did Michaela, but it's not at all what I apply to my everyday work. I think it really just depends on what you're trying to get exposure to and how you can kind of figure out that way of thinking about data as a tool to solve problems and not simply like the solution. But I appreciate it. And if others just want to jump in, please do. This is a fun room.
Most people I've worked with like at high levels on like presidential campaigns and other organizations learned SQL and like how to use Tableau and specific BI tools on a job or an internship. That's what I did. It's like totally doable. There's a lot of online resources. So like definitely don't let that hold you back. And yeah, like I do not have a master's degree and like, yeah, that's just not necessary if you are like willing to learn. It's hard at first, but yeah, just echoing what Gabby said.
Amazing. All these questions are awesome. And someone just dropped a link to a SQL tutorial in the chat, which is a great resource. So thank you so much. If there's no more questions, and if you actually do have more questions, feel free to join our Slack community and you can ask anyone in there questions, even if Amanda's in there, so we can respond to you as well. But thank you everyone for coming to this. Huge thank you to Amanda for all your hard work and putting that together. You did an incredible job. Claps for Amanda. But yeah, we at Data Culture, we throw events monthly and you can follow us on Instagram at data_cult to see our next event in May. But thank you all so much for coming and can't wait to see you next time. And we will be sending out the slide deck as well as the recording in the following days. Okay, bye everyone. Have a good night.
And in the meantime, I'm going to make a quick announcement. If you're looking for work in the BI and analytics space, we are hiring. Please reach out. Careers at Data Culture. We're so